Okay, I think we should start now. So, in the last week, we have learned about the thermal analysis of the polymers, elastomers, and composites. So, I'm going to give a brief overview about the techniques which you have learned, like DSC, TGA, and DMA. So, for the DSC, I'll talk about the working principle and different types of DSC and how the calibration is done, etc. And same for the TGA. I'll talk about the different types of TGA and their working principles and the instrumentation and calibration. And I'll talk about the dynamic mechanical analysis, that is the viscoelastic property, resilience, how the DMA works, and some of the tests which we can perform using the DMA, and the storage modulus, loss modulus, and tan delta, which we can get with the DMA analysis. So, starting with the why do we need the thermal analysis, first of all? So, it is basically gives us the idea about the thermal decomposition, solid state reactions, roasting, and calcination of metals. So, some metals in polymers can be in the form of additives or in the form of some other impurities or something. So in those cases, we need to get the idea about the calcination of metal and corrosion of metal also. So in that case, it is very useful. Then the determination of moisture and volatile liquids, and pyrolysis of coal, petroleum, and wood. Rate of evaporation and sublimation can also be found out with the help of thermal analysis. Then the phase diagram and stoichiometry, thermo-oxidative degradation of polymers, glass transition, of course, that we can get from the DSC and also from the DMA also. Then adsorption and desorption phenomena, Curie temperature, magnetic susceptibility, and decomposition of explosive materials. So first of all, let's classify the thermoanalytical techniques. So based on different parameters, we can classify it in multiple ways. So when we are taking a particular variable and determining that property of that particular parameter in with the help of with increasing the temperature or decreasing the temperature, the changes of these parameters can be identified, and those can be divided. So the technique can be divided likewise. So if we are determining the mass change in mass based on the temperature gradient, so that is called as thermogravimetry or derivative thermogravimetry. Then if we are determining the mechanical properties, then it is thermomechanical analysis. Then if we are considering the energy, then it is DSC, differential scanning calorimetry. Then temperature, so that is for differential thermal analysis. And dimension, so thermodynamic galvanometry. Then magnetic property, if we are taking into consideration, then it is thermomagnetometry. If we are taking the electrical property, then it is thermoelectrometry. Then acoustic property, if the acoustic property is changing with the application of temperature, then it is thermosonimetry. And if the optical property is changing with the application of thermal uh, or the temperature, then it is thermooptometry. So thermal analysis of rubber. So it is a method by which we can determine the physical and chemical properties of a substance, mixture or reaction mixture, and it is used to determine these properties as a function of temperature or time. And while sample is subjected to a controlled temperature problem, so we can increase the temperature with time, or we can keep a particular temperature at constant with and see the difference in the physical and chemical properties with time. So both can be done. So we can do the uh, static property check, or dynamic, or isothermal, or a combination of both. So static means isothermal, and if we are increasing the cooling rate or heating rate, in that case it is dynamic. So both can be checked with these kind of analysis, and a combination of both also can be done, because if we want to keep a temperature at constant for some time and then increase it and then again keep it constant, that can also be done. So for the rubber industry, products temperature and its effect play a very important role from the production stage through to the final, like from the production to the final stage. The temperature plays a very important role. So that's why the analysis of this requires very fast analysis is needed actually, and to determine the basic composition of different rubbers which are vulcanized. So in those cases, the common techniques which are used are differential scanning calorimetry, thermogravimetric analysis, differential thermal analysis. It is a differentiation of TGA only. So DTA is basically obtained from the differentiation of TGA value. And then we have the dynamic mechanical analysis, DMA. So first let's talk about the DSC. So DSC is a thermoanalytical technique in which the difference in the heat flow rate between the sample and a reference is measured. That can be a function of a time or temperature or a combination of both. So here we have basically two samples. One is the sample which we want to determine, and the second one is the reference. So first sample that is our material which can be either elastomer or plastic or any kind of sample, and the reference is basically so I'll talk about what reference we use in the DSC. So that should be inert sometime, like most of the time we want it to be inert material so that it does not interfere with uh, it does not the property will not change for that one. So the temperature difference between these two can be and can be determined, and the difference in the heat flow rate is actually analyzed for our sample, so to get the property of the sample. So it can be either a function of time or temperature. So this technique was developed by Watson and Neal in 1962, and it is soon commercialized in 1963 by the in the Petersburg Conference on Analytical Chemistry and Applied Spectroscopy. So the working principle goes like this. So we have a sample and a reference. So these are kept in separate furnace and identical chambers and heated separately by individually controlled elements. So as the temperature of the environment is altered, so we are changing the temperature. So we are heating it basically, and the sample and reference are continuously maintained at the same level. So we need to keep these two at the same level. So how much energy is required to keep it at that particular temperature? That is basically is analyzed. So this is made possible by the help of a closed loop negative feedback control of the power which is supplied to the sample and reference. And this is the differential power which is automatically varied continuously as per the energy absorption as a function of sample temperature. So this sample if it is taking more heat, so then in that case it needs to dissipate the heat to come at the uh, at the set temperature. So we have actually set these two samples at a particular temperature and then we are heating it. So but we need to keep these at constant temperature. So that is the amount of heat which we are giving it, and the sample is receiving either or dissipating, that we need to determine. So that is how we can. So that is how the principle of this DSC works, and so the area between the DSC curves, I'll talk about it. So that needs to be analyzed. So it can be either energy absorption or energy dissipation, which uh, we can get from the curve, basically from the energy flow. So the calibration for the conversion of area unit to calories is independent of temperature and scanning rate and nature of the sample. So this is a quantitative analytical technique basically. So here's the again. So we have two heaters, and the temperature of the sample and reference is taken, and the difference in the temperature is basically taken, and then we can get the the heat rate basically, the heat flow rate per unit time, so that we can calculate from the DSC. Okay, so here is a uh, equation for like how to calculate the CP and etc. So dH by dt is what we provide it. So DH is the enthalpy, or DSC heat flow signal that we provide. And then we have CP, which is the sample heat capacity, so which is equals to specific heat into the sample weight. So samples specific heat into weight. And then dt is the heating rate by which we are heating our sample. So this can be either 5 degrees centigrade per minute, or 10 degrees centigrade per minute, or 20, depending upon our choice, like our application basically. Then this is the again some constant which can be either function of time or temperature. So this equation needs to be considered while we are talking about the calculation of the CP. But we can directly calculate the CP from the curve also. So here, as you can see, so here the CP, uh, basically this is the delta CP which we need to consider. Here also we can get the CP from the like starting, and then so here some in the starting it will take some time to get like some impurities and all will be removed from the sample. So it will be increase in the slight increase will be there in the heat flux in the starting, and then it will become constant. Then again the bonds will start breaking and the glass transition will come, where the state of the polymer will change. So from the solid it will start to become liquid. So this is the glass transition temperature at which it will change its state. So that is the delta Cp which we can get from here. Then there is a dip in the peak. That means the reaction is either heat dissipating or the dip can is signifies the dip means the energy is dissipating, and the increase means or the peak means the energy is taking. So in the system, so system is taking the energy, and then there is a ending transient. And this if it is in a linear range, so in that case we can plot it like this between the temperature and time. So we are increasing the temperature with the time as 20 degree centigrade per minute. So with every minute the 20-degree rise will occur. So it is a linear temperature scale basically. So yeah, again same thing. So from the glass transition we can get the delta Cp value, which is our requirement, and this is the starting transient. So the only this will be for to calculate the baseline. Basically, this is the starting transient and this is the baseline. So this heat is just to shift the baseline. Then glass transition again causes a baseline shift. So here the starting is the shift because of the impurities and all, and then again there is a shift because of the change in the state. And then the crystallization, this is the exothermic process, and the melting is the endothermic process. And then we can calculate the area between these two graphs to get the I- uh, proper exact value of the uh, heat required. So in the case of exothermic, the heat dissipated and heat required, and in the case of endothermic, heat dissipated. So different thermal transitions are as follows. So first of all, the glass transition will occur, which is the endothermic process. Then the crystallization transition occur, that is the exothermic process, and the melting transition will happen as we increase the temperature. So this is again an endothermic process, and then we have the degradation transition. So this is again exothermic. It will take up heat to degrade or dissociate the bond. So it is an exothermic process. So first is the melting. So this we'll talk about the melting first. So this is the first order transition. Melting point is at which temperature the crystalline phase becomes disordered, viscous liquid. So the phase will change basically. So it is a first order transition, and this is the Gibbs uh, phase. From the Gibbs equation, you get this um, relation between the delta G by delta T at constant pressure with respect to temperature, and then again this is delta G by delta P at constant temperature with respect to temperature. So these two are both very similar. We can easily differentiate the phase change with this hump occurring in the both the cases. However, in this case, the Gibbs function with respect to temperature, here we only get a point, so the that is not very much prominent, but still we can observe that the phase is changing, and in these two cases the phase change is very much prominent. Then the second glass transition temperature, that is a second order transition. So here, uh, basically the change is second order. That means the derivative, second order derivative of Gibbs free energy is taken into consideration. So the alpha, that is the derivative of the Gibbs function. So here V is the delta G by delta P at constant temperature. So again, if we take a, derivative of this, so if we put the value of V, again we have to differentiate the Gibbs function again. So this is alpha and this is beta, and these are the formula for these two. And for the glass transition temperature, the graph is plotted between alpha and the temperature. So alpha is the second order derivative of this function, and T is the temperature. And here also, if we plot a graph like in between these two, then we can get the phase where we can see where the transition is happening. So these are two very prominent changes we can see. And if we plot between V and T, here also we can get a point where the transition has happened. So that can also be determined with the help of these curves. So then for the thermocouples which are used in DSC, so there are multiple thermocouples based upon our need of like maximum temperature, how much we want, maximum or minimum temperature. So the least temperature goes in the copper constant. But again, if we want to increase the temperature, then the various thermocouples are there: chromal, alumel, platinum, and 10% rhodium, and tungsten 26% uranium, etc. So these are very much these gives very high temperature, around like 1000 to 2400. And then we have a chromal constant differential thermocouple, which is from minus 150 to 600. So it goes in a negative range also. So this is very widely used, but however still we can use high temperature thermocouple also depending upon our application. So there are different types of DSC. So, but majorly heat flux and power consumption compensation DSC are used. Modulated is also used sometimes, but and hyper and pressure DSC are very less commonly used. So the heat flux DSC includes the disk type measuring system, and then cylinder type measuring system, turret type measuring system, and micro differential DSC. The heat flux DSC is shown here. The typical instrumentation is shown here, and it has again a sample and a reference, and two resistors are there. One heat resistor is there, and two thermocouples are there. And again, these two are attached to the amplifier, and one more thermocouple this side for the heat. So this is the heater, and the blue one is the heat sink, where so it has to have a heat sink also because the energy is getting dissipated. So here again we have a thermocouple, and these are connected with the CPU. So, the pan is containing the sample, and an empty pan is also there for the reference pan. So it is placed on a thermoelectric disk, and it is enclosed in a furnace. So as the furnace is heated at a linear heating rate, the heat is transmitted to the sample and the reference pan through the thermoelectric disk. So we have a disk which is transmitting the heat to the sample and the reference. And the reference is there is nothing in the reference pan; it is empty. And the sample pan is containing our sample. So the difference in temperature of the sample and reference is because of the heat capacity of the sample, and that is what is measured, and we can get by the area of the thermocouple and or thermograms basically, and the resultant heat flow is calculated by the by this formula Ohm's law, Q equals to R delta T, and here Q is the sample heat flow, delta T is the temperature difference between the sample and the difference, and R is the resistance of the thermoelectric disk. Then we have power compensated DSC. So in that case, we have sample and reference which are placed in different two different furnaces, and one is so exothermic. If there is an exothermic reaction, then the heat yielded, that means the heat is taken, and if it is endothermic, the heat is absorbed. So and the change is basically calculated, the change between the sample and the reference. So the power or energy is applied and removed from one or both of the calorimeters depending upon the reaction. So if it is an exothermic, the heat will be dissipated, and it is exothermic, the heat will be if it is exothermic, the heat is dissipated, and in the case of endothermic, the heat is absorbed. So the power compensated DSC system is maintained at a thermal null state at all times, and the amount of power required to maintain the system in equilibrium is directly proportional to the energy changes occurring in the cycle. So we can directly check the. So it is similar. The only the power which is needs required, or if it is uh, compensated, both can be checked. Both can be analyzed, and then we can it is directly proportional to the energy change, so we can relate it with the energy change, whether it is taking heat or yielding heat, so that can be checked. So a power compensated DSC provides a true measure of the calorimeter property of the sample, since the fundamental measurement is energy flow. So basically, with the energy flow, we can directly we can relate it to the energy changes. So the advantage of this kind of design over the heat flux is that the masses of the individual furnaces of the power compensated system are much lower than that of the heat flux. So we do not need to take the mass into consideration basically. Then the faster response time of the power compensated DSC also provides a much higher degree of resolution as compared to the heat flux type DSC. So again, if we try to uh, make the compare these two. So in the heat flux, the sample and reference are kept in same furnace, and in the power compensated DSC, we have sample and reference kept in separate furnace. And the heat flux DSC, the heat flow of the sample and reference is measured. And in the power compensated DSC, the amount of power required to maintain the same temperature is measured. Then the temperature difference is converted to the heat flow using the mechanical calculations. And in the power compensated DSC, the heat flow is measured directly as the amount of power required, and which is proportional to the heat flow. Then third one is the modulated DSC. So it is uh, a technique where which also measures the difference in the heat flow in the sample and difference as a function of time, like what we have seen in the heat flux DSC. However, in the modulated DSC, a sinusoidal temperature modulation is superposed on the linear uh, heating profile. So here we are not increasing the temperature in a linear profile. However, it is a sinusoidal profile. And to yield the temperature program, we use the average temperature varies continuously in sinusoidal manner. So temperature is increasing in a sinusoidal manner. So the major advantage is its ability to resolve overlapping transitions that occur in many polymers. And in particular, the class transition may coincide with a number of processes. So therefore, the sine wave is basically gives a better resolution if the if it is overlapping with other transitions. So that is the key benefit of the modulated DSC. So as you can see here, so heat applied, and then so this is the constant heating rate, which is linear which we use in the other DSCs like heat flow and modulated or consummated. But in the modulated one, we do not use a linear profile, but in the modulated. This is a sine function. So again we can uh, from the heating profile we can get the information about the heat capacity and the rate of change of temperature. So with the formula we can measure the Cp that so that is equals to K Q amp by Tm and P by 2 pi. So Q amp is the heat flow amplitude and T amp is the temperature amplitude. So this is the formula for the calculation of the Cp. Then we have hyper DSC and pressure DSC. So these are not not commonly used. So I'm just skipping these. Then calibration of DSC, how it happens. So first of all, the instrument set of factors which are considered, that is purge gas, which gas we are using. It can be either nitrogen, oxygen, or helium. Then cooling accessories which are used. Then pan selection, whether it is aluminium, gold, platinum, copper. Then the standards for DSC calibration are ASTM E967 and ASTM E968. So these two are the standards which we generally use for the calibration of DSC. Then the materials for the calibration are indium, which melts at 156.6 degrees Celsius, and tin, which melts at around 231.9, and then we have zinc, which melts at 419.5 degrees Celsius. So this is a typical DSC graph, calibration graph, and we know that the for this particular material, which is indium in this case, so it has to come around 166.6. So if it is coming at the exact same position, then we know that our calibration is correct, and also the area we can get uh, from the calculation, and we know that how much energy is coming for this, and that can be cross checked with the standard one. So the information which we get from the DSC are the glass emission temperature, melting temperature, purity, crystallization time and temperature, percentage crystallinity, polymorphism, heat of fusion and heat of reaction, specific heat and heat capacity, oxidative stability, rate of cure, degree of cure, completeness of cure. That can also be checked, and reaction kinetics, which are covered in later classes, and the thermal stability. So these all can be checked with the DSC. So the calculation is like this. So delta Cp means delta Cp is the difference in the Cp of sample and the reference, and again it can be expressed as delta dH by dt at a constant pressure. So that is again written as delta dH by dt into dt by d capital T. So that is for the temperature. So this is the temperature rate, this is the heat flow rate, and this is the our heat capacity of the system. So to calculate the heat capacity, this is the total heat capacity, which is heat capacity of polymer plus uh, heat capacity of the sample, like mass of sample pen minus mass of reference pen. So these also needs to be considered when we are calculating the specific heat of the polymer. So yeah, so here one more thing you can check, like in the first scan there is some kind of noise or some kind of we can say the dip, or actually that is because of the thermal history of the material. So to avoid that, get we can perform a second heating scan. So in that case we can get a clear TG uh, which is not affected by the thermal history of the material, and that can be checked. So the better what we can say the better value of the TG will be obtained in the second scanning. So in the first scan, there will be a lot of thermal history of the polymer of our material. So, but still that will provide us the glass transition temperature and the crystallization transition and melting transition also. But in the second case, if we want to accurately detect the TG, so in the second case we can get a accurate value of the TG. So that's why sometimes we can perform the second scan also to get a exact true property of the material basically. And because in the first scan there might be some of the some processing effect can affect our TG value. So to get the accurate or true value of the TG, we can perform the second heating scan. Then we have the Fox equation. So if we are blending two kind of polymers, suppose polymer 1 and polymer 2, and if we are blending these two, if these are very much miscible, then we will get a single TG. But if they are not miscible at all, then we'll get two different distinct TGs. So this is the equation 1 by Tg equals to W1 by Tg1 plus W2 by Tg2. And W1 W2 is the weight fraction of the component 1 and 2. So we know that for the component 1 we have Tg1 at certain value, and for component 2 we have Tg2 at certain value. So these two are known, and if we are blending these two, the if depending upon the miscibility, if these are very much miscible, then we'll get a single TG. If they are not, then we'll get a distinct TG, but the value can be different from these two because there is some kind of miscibility in both. Then the temperature will shift. So we'll see how it shifts. So here we have, you can consider the PEO and POM and a composite of PO and PEO. So in this case, you can see for the PEO we have TG at 37 degrees Celsius, and for POM the TG is around 144. So for the composite, we will get two TGs, one at 40, which is slightly shifted, and another one is at 143, which is also slightly shifted. So, and again one more is coming at around 85 degrees Celsius. So that is the case. That is the that is because of the miscibility. Then if those are very miscible, then we'll get shifted TGs. So here is an example of NPR PVC blend composite with percentage of acrylonitrile content, and which is keep on increasing. So first one is the neat NPR, then we are increasing the NPR PVC again in the second one. And so in the first one it is 31% acrylonitrile, and the second one it is 44% acrylonitrile nitrate. And then so first one is the NPR only in both the cases, then NPR PVC. So PVC is 25% in both the cases, and then we are increasing it to 50%. So as you can see, with increasing the increasing the percentage of PVC, the TG is also increasing. So again, for the neat PVC, it is coming in this area, in this range. So you can see the difference, and the composite is coming at middle of these 2 points. So this can be seen in both the cases, both in 31% acrylonitrile and 44% acrylonitrile content. Then one more example for the PCl, if we are adding the PEO, it is as a sacrificial material. PEO, we saw that it is coming around 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, so PCl has a peak, it's around 31, 25 around, and then we have for the PEO we have around 37, which is not here, like it is not mentioned here, but still. So we can get two peaks in which are, because these two are not at all miscible. So we are getting two distinct peaks, as you can see, with increasing the amount of PEO, the peaks are also peak intensity is also increasing. So that is how the miscibility plays a role in the change or shift in the PG. Then the determination of crystallinity. So we can determine the percentage of crystallinity in the polymer. So if the if the material is amorphous, then the TG will be lower for those cases, and if the material is crystalline, then the TG will be higher. That is what we know from our earlier knowledge. Here what we are observing that here here the exothermic reaction is happening, and so for the less pressure, that is 5 megapascal, two peaks were there, and then we are increasing the pressure. In that case, the TG is also shifting. So here it is showing that with increasing the pressure also, the shift peak shift is coming like this. So the TG is increasing at higher value. So, and the enthalpy, which can be calculated by the area under the peak, to get the enthalpy value for crystallization and melting, you might be able to use a fitting curve software. So we can get the value from the fitting software, the exact value of how much it is, uh, how much the area is there. So with the help of that we can keep this formula, and we can determine the degree of crystallinity. Then again the effect of fillers. So if we are adding the fillers, the you can see with 70% filler, the peak intensity got decreased because it is exothermic, and then shift is also there in the lower at the lower range. So it is slightly shifted to the lower side as compared to the 30%. And again, so the first one is for the melting curve, and the second one is the crystallization curve. So crystallization again is reduced. So here also the peak intensity is reduced and is shifted to towards the right, that is higher side. So the different environment, like different chemical environment like plasticizer blends, it will give different effects on the glass transition. So if we are adding the plasticizer, the plasticizer will shift the transition temperature towards the lower temperature range. Then blends. So if it is incompatible blend, then two distinct TG will appear. Whereas if it is a compatible or totally miscible blend, it will give only one single TG. So then in the case of a copolymer, both block and graph copolymer of compatible monomer, it will show a transition. Otherwise, two transition peaks, two temperature will come. So if it is a compatible, that is miscible, then only one transition will come, and if it is not, then we will get two transitions. Then chemical modification. So the TG is step height and the width of the transition can change. Several transition can occur in the case of chemical modification. Then the filler. So again in the filler, the step height decreases with increasing the filler quantity. So, but the filler will not give any effect on the transition temperature. So next one is the thermogravimetric analysis (TGA), or it is also called as thermal gravimetry analysis. So it is a method for the analysis of thermal analysis of the polymer, in which the mass of the sample is measured over time as the temperature changes, or with time also. So we can keep the temperature constant and vary with time we can change. We can check the weight loss, or we can even keep on reducing the temperature also with time, and we can observe the weight loss. So the principle of the thermogravimetry is based on thermobalance, which describes an instrument that continuously measure the weight changes of a substance at gradually varying temperatures. So here is a typical diagram of a thermogravimetric analysis instrument. So we have a measuring system and a sample. Our sample is kept here, and this is the heater. Basically, this is kept in a furnace, and this kind of curve we will get. This is called a thermogram. So this blue one is the TGA thermogram, and the orange one is the DTG. So DTG is a derivative of the TGA, and it describes the rate of weight change with respect to time or temperature. Like it depends upon our study, and is represented by dW by dt or dW by d capital T. Small t for time and capital T for temperature. So in order to study the multi-components, the role of TTG is very important. So as you can see here in the TGA, the weight loss is started from here somewhere, and it's keep on decreasing, and a sharp decrease is coming. But in DTG, in the derivative curve, we can see that we are getting three peaks, four peaks basically. One is here, then one is here, and one here. That is the highest maximum peak. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Four peaks are coming in the DTG. That means the degradation is happening in four steps. But however, in the TGA, we are not able to distinguish the four steps here. So that's why the DTG is very important for the multi-component system analysis. So uh, basically, so this is so for with the help of DTG, we are able to quantify properly. Our uh, analysis can be easily made, so it can be a quantitative analysis. So here is an example of a natural rubber, polybutadiene rubber, and oil. So here the mixture was natural rubber and polybutadiene rubber in oil. So the oil degrades first at around 250 degrees Celsius. Then we are getting two peaks at 365 and 450 degrees Celsius. So that is very much visible with the DTG, and also in TGA. The degradation is starting around 200, and then it is kept on reducing, but we are not able to distinguish the steps. So it is better to plot DTG for a better analysis. So as I told, it can be static or dynamic or quasi-static. So the static means we are not increasing the temperature, we are keeping it at a constant temperature. So suppose at 200 degrees Celsius, if I am checking with time, so at if I keep 200 degrees Celsius constant temperature here, so that is the isothermal or static thermogravimetry, and the weight loss is recorded with time. And in the extreme, another extreme, we have dynamic thermogravimetry. That means we are keep on changing the temperature with time. So starting from around room temperature, that is 25 degrees Celsius, if I am taking it around 600 to 700 degrees Celsius with a rate of 20 degrees Celsius per minute, then I am going to do a dynamic thermogravimetry. So here both the temperature is increasing and with time, and it is a linear increase. Then the middle one is the quasi-static. That means for a particular time, I am keeping the temperature constant, and then it is reducing, and the weight loss is also reducing. Oh, sorry, increasing. If the then the temperature is increasing, but the weight loss is reducing, and then again constant. So it can be done in steps. So this is the quasi-static thermometer. So in that case, uh, the temperature is raised at a in a sequential steps, which is separated by isothermal intervals, and uh, so to get a stability, basically to get a stable curve. Suppose if it is reducing, if the weight loss is keep on reducing, and I want to make it stable, and if so the temperature is also increasing, in that case it will not give a better curve. So what I will do, I'll try to stabilize this initial baseline with a constant temperature, and then I will increase the temperature, so the weight loss will keep on reducing, and then again uh, I can check the weight loss percentage. So that is how the quasi-static thermogravimetry will work. So the principle here we have a thermobalance. So one side we keep a sample, and another side it is the basically to balance it we have another weight, and so that is for the balance. So it is connected to a controller, and the mass of this sample will be directly coming to the computer screen. So when we load the sample, the thermobalance will measure the mass of the sample, and it will come at the on our computer screen. Then the current is applied to the meter moment, and return the balance to the null position. So here we apply the current, and it will come to the null position, and the amount of current applied is proportional to the weight loss or weight gain. So that is how the working of this TGA. So the instrument consists of a photodiode and LEDs and meter movement, balance arm, This is the valence arm. Then tear pen. Then sample platform. Here is the sample platform. Thermocouple. Then sample pan here. So one is the tear pen, one is the sample pen. As I told, two pens are there, one and two. Then we have a furnace assembly. So as I told, the temperature is kept in a the sample is kept in a furnace. So here is furnace assembly, and the inert gas is purged. So it can be either inert or also atmosphere also can be used. So, but normally nitrogen and are used, but we can also use helium or oxygen also. Then we have a heater and elevator base and purge gas inlet. Here is the inlet and is the outlet, and the sample pan holder. So we can use pans of platinum, aluminium, alumina, and the heating rate depends upon our study. So normally 10 microgram sample are used, 10 mg sample are used, but and the thermovalence is having very high precision of around plus minus 10 micrograms. So it is a very high precision thermovalence. Then the furnace with temperature programming facility and the facility for providing inert or oxidizing atmosphere is also there. And the computer will be there to collect the data and store and process the data. So first, in the when we perform the TGF, first the moisture loss will happen. So the moisture and some of the volatile gases will evaporate from the sample, and then the degradation of small molecules will happen. Then the degradation of larger molecules or polymers will happen. So this all will be done in the nitrogen atmosphere, inert atmosphere, but it can also be done in the air or oxygen, and it totally depends upon our study. Then for the degradation of carbonaceous filler, it is hard to uh, degrade it in the inert atmosphere. So that's why we need oxygen or air for this case. And then will the remaining component is what we get, that is in the form of a ash. So as we increase the temperature, first we try to perform it in an inert atmosphere, then increase the temperature, uh, then increase the temperature in a oxidative or air atmosphere. Then the TG calibration can be performed with the help of a the factors which affect the calibration are purge gas and flow rate, and the type of specimen pan, which is platinum or aluminium, and the heating rates also. Then the standards which are used for the calibration of TGA are ASTM E1582, that is standard practice for calibration of temperature scale for thermogravimetry. Then ASTM E2040, that is the standard test method for mass scale calibration of thermogravimetric analyzers. And then we have ISO 11358, which is thermogravimetry of polymers. So these all three can be used, any of these can be used. Then materials for calibration which are based on the Curie temperature are alumel, then nickel cobalt, different in different ratios, and nickel also, and cobalt also separate. So we can use these of the materials for the calibration. Then the information which we get from the TGA are thermal stability of materials, oxidative stability of materials, then composition of multi-component systems, estimated lifetime of a product, and then decomposition of or kinetic of materials, and effect of reactive or corrosive atmosphere on materials, and moisture and volatile content on the in the material. So this is the typical TGA of this these different polymers were used to perform this TGA, and first the case was nitrogen, and then after at this point the gas is switched to air, and the ramp was 20 degrees Celsius per minute in both the cases. So first in the nitrogen atmosphere, we can see that the PVC degraded very early around 250, no, 250 degrees Celsius. Then it is then PMA degraded, then PET and nylon Yeah, PET in nylon degraded at much closer temperatures, but the ash content in the in the PET is higher. This is basically not ash, but the carbonaceous particle, which was higher. And then when the gas was switched, the this content got again to zero, because there is no. So the carbonaceous material also gets degraded in the air atmosphere, so that comes to zero. Then the most stable is the PPS, polypropylene, and then with the gas switch, it has very high content of carbonaceous particle. That is the aromatic structure shows the formation of graphitic molecules. So again, this will be higher because of the presence of aromatic rings. And after the switching of gas, that carbonaceous material will again get degraded and comes to the zero value. So that is how we can check the thermal stability of our polymers. Then oxidative stability. So we can perform the experiment in two different atmosphere. Like for polypropylene, one in the nitrogen, it is degrading around at 431 degrees Celsius. But in oxygen, it is degrading much earlier, around 285 degrees Celsius. So that can also be checked. So the oxidative stability of the polymers can also be checked. Then the differentiation between the block and random polymers. So just So, acco- uh, so likewise, we can even check the block and random copolymers and their thermal stability. So here you can see in the red one, and which is a single polymer of polystyrene, and then we have a block copolymer, and so in the block copolymer, two different steps or two sequential steps are visible. So that means the first block is getting degraded, and then the second block is getting degraded. So that is how the uh, degradation is happening with temperature. And in the random one, it is a mixed degradation, and it is degrading at much lower temperature as compared to the only single polymer. So that can also be differentiated with the help of the PGA curve. Then we can also calculate the percentage of some of the copolymer. So, for example, this EVA, which contains vinyl acetate. So, in this case, the acetic acid is known, which is around 16.85%. So, around 3.2 mg of this weight loss is because of the acetic acid, and the remaining is from the polymer. So that can be calculated, and how much vinyl acetate was there, that we can calculate with the help of the weight loss percentage. Then the calculation of filler content. So we can also calculate the filler, how much it was present in the polymer, filler content or the carbon black. So as we know that after a certain point, we change the atmosphere to the oxygen, and then from here around 20% is what we get, and that is around 2.957 mgs. So that calculation we can perform. So initially it was so the initial 11.26 mg was the our polymer, and 2.9 mg was our filler or the carbon black. So then different again first the volatile gases will go, and then we have the polymer which will degrade, and then the carbon, because we are switching the gas to air here, and then the remaining still after switching to ash, if there is again some of the after switching to air, if there is some ash remaining, that can be because of the silica. So that content also we can calculate with the help of TGA. Then for different in different cases, like here we can see that first the polymer is getting degraded and the carbon black after switching to air. Then there is a inert filler. So inert filler percentage can also vary depending upon our polymer. So in this case it is very high, and then in the second case there is some degradation because of the light oil, then polymer, then carbon black, and very less inert filler is there. And then in the third case, the polymer and heavy oil degrades in one step only, because it does not show a distinct peak for heavy oil. So it is difficult to differentiate whether the degradation was from the polymer or the heavy oil. So we consider it as a common temperature. Then we have a carbon black after switching to air. Then there is an inert filler. So that is how we can analyze our sample. So this is a typical curve for oil. Uh, so we can get the amount of oil in or plasticizer in our elastomer. So we can check it with the help of this formula. So first is the A is oil, then B is polymer. So the ratio of these two will give us the amount of oil to plasticizer. Then the carbon black. So the ratio of C to B, C is the carbon black. So ratio of C to B will give us the amount of carbon black present in our sample. Then the amount of ash, or uh, which can be because of the mineral or ZNO. ZNO comes from the fillers or some other impurities. So that is denoted by D. So ratio of D to B will give us the amount of ash present in our elastomer. So the advantages of the TGA, it can be coupled with so for advancement of TGA, it can be coupled with the GCMS or FTIR, because the tar which we get after this point, the tar can also be checked in FTIR, and upon degradation we can check what kind of material is formed because of the thermal degradation. And also the evolved gases can be analyzed with some other kind of characterization. Then to so as I told, so initially the moisture loss will happen, which is in the inert atmosphere at around 100 degrees Celsius. Then the degradation of polymer will occur, or oil or plasticizer, and other antioxidants or antioxidants. So this can be degraded around 350 degrees centigrade. Then there is a phase where a heat stable processing add elastomer or resin will go. So that is the range around 350 to 600 degrees Celsius, which is in inert atmosphere. Then we need to switch to the oxygen atmosphere for the carbonaceous fillers to degrade at around 600, more than 600 degrees Celsius. Then the non-volatile residues will be there in the form of the char, and it can be, so these can be metallic oxides, fillers, or the silica or ZNO. Uh, so these are in the form of ash, and this will we will get after some video sessions. Then coming to the DMA, so there is a dynamic mechanical analyzer. So the property which we check in the DMA is the viscoelasticity. Viscoelasticity is the combination of viscosity and elasticity. So suppose we have a spring and a damper system. So spring will store the energy, and dashpot will be dissipating the energy. So if we keep it in a form of in a parallel form, then the elongation of this spring will be dependent upon the this damper or dashpot. So the elongation will be lesser in this case. However, if we put that in a series form, the property will be different. So depending upon these two, so these are two different properties. The one is the viscosity and the other one is the elasticity. And the combination of these two we get some of our polymers. So viscoelasticity of polymer can be explained mathematically by a Maxwell element, where the system consists of a dashpot element and a spring element in series. And for so this is the Maxwell element, and the one which is in the series is the Maxwell, and one which is having the parallel. This is for the Kelvin White model. So the spring and dashpot are in parallel. So when the load is applied in a material, so it is independent of time. So it is dependent on the time, and we need to consider not only its strength but also the extent to which it will give the energy. So that is dissipated energy, that is viscous, and retrieved energy, that is elastic. So these two, uh, this can be imagined as we are throwing a ball from a certain height, and then it is coming back to a certain height, and some of the energy is lost. So this is the loss modulus and this is the elastic modulus, and different material will be having different resilience means the ability of the compound to restore and return the energy at a given frequency and temperature. So the first one is the cis polyisoprene, which is having rebound at around 230, after 230 or 250, it is regaining the uh, resilience property. Then for the second one, the property will go much higher after 350 and all, and so on. And then we have the third one, which is polychloroprene, chloroprene, which is having similar uh, temperature range, but it is higher than the cis polyisoprene. Then the fourth one is it is its temperature is degrading at 430, but again after increasing this temperature, it is becoming more resilient. So that is how the property of these polymers are changing with temperature. Basically, the resilience property of these systems. So the dynamic mechanical analysis. So how do we check the resilience property of our polymer? We cannot use the bouncing rubber ball method because it is not at all practical in most of the cases. So to examine the elasticity as a function of temperature and frequency, we use the dynamic mechanical tester, and so we impose a small sinusoidal shear or tensile strain which is in the linear region, which is LVR, that is linear viscoelastic region, and then measure the stress or so by performing the strain, we by applying the strain, we measure the stress, or vice versa. Like if we apply the stress, then we measure the strain. So DMA can be described as applying an oscillatory force to a sample and then analyzing the material's response to that force. So basically here the oscillatory force is the key here. So this is a typical DMA tester, which is having a force motor coil and magnet, and temperature enclosure, LVDT, core rod, interchangeable measuring system, furnace, and a heat sink. So we need to consider input and output functions, and a sine wave current is added to the force coil. The resultant sine wave voltage of the LVDT is compared to the sine wave force. So here the voltage is proportional to the force applied basically. So how much force we are getting, or vice versa. If we are applying the strain, then how much is we are getting. Then the amplitude of the LVDT is related to the storage modulus E dash via the spring constant K. Then the phase leg delta, that is also related to the E double dash via the damping constant D. So spring constant K will give us the storage modulus, and the damping constant D will give us the loss modulus. So spring is to how much energy is absorbed, and damping means the how much energy is relieved. So there are common geometries for DMA. These are some of them. Single cantilever bending. If we have a film, which is stable enough to hold at one point. So in the another on the opposite edge, we can perform the testing, which is in the form of it can be either compression or tension. Then if it is not at all stable, so we need to hold it at 2 points. Then we need to take it dual cantilever bending, and we can perform the testing or compression here. Then 3 point bending can also be done, checked. Then tension. So here we are applying for a block particularly. This can be used. Uh, this arrangement can be used. So it can be either tension or in compression. Then for liquids, particularly we use the shear setup. So first, so normally what happens? We get a we perform a deformation in an oscillation form, that is a sinusoidal form, and then we get a response again in the same form, sinusoidal form. It can be so the deformation can be in a form of stress or strain, and the response can be in a form of strain or stress, or vice versa. So then, if there is a some phase angle change, so here some phase shift is there. So that difference of the phase is also measured in the dynamic mechanical testing, and most of the viscoelastic materials show this phase angle or phase shift in the response. So how it happens? So in the normal Hookean solid or purely elastic material, the phase angle will be zero. There will be no phase shift. But however, in the Newtonian liquid or totally liquid material or purely viscous material, this phase shift will be around 90 degrees. So for our viscoelastic material, that is the polymer which is about to become solid, in those cases, the phase angle will be from 0 to 90 degrees. So the response will be viscoelastic response we will get between the angle 0 to 90 degrees. So that is how we can see that the response here this uh, here the deformation is maximum, but the response is lesser, or it is not the maxima here, but the maxima is coming somewhere here. So the difference between both two maxima is the phase angle or phase shift. So the properties which we observe from DMA is the first one is the modulus. So this is the normal overall resistance to deformation. E is equals to stress by strain. However, we check the elastic modulus or the storage modulus. This is the ability of a material to store energy, and this is the cos delta function of the Young's modulus. So E dash is the stress by strain into cos delta. Then for the viscous modulus or the loss modulus, that is the ability of a material to dissipate energy or energy lost as heat. So that can be calculated using the E double dash formula, that is E double dash stress by strain sine delta. Then we measure the tan delta. It is also a very important mm, parameter. So it measures the material damping such as vibration or sound damping. So this is the ratio of tan delta is equals to E double dash divided by E dash. So this can be also visualized as this kind of graph. So at one side in the y-axis we have loss modulus, in the x-axis we have elastic storage modulus, and then at a particular delta function we get a complex modulus. So complex is equals to E dash plus I E double dash. So that is the complex. So complex. I'm sorry, this is not so good. So it is equals to. Okay, I might go to make it. So I hope you understood what I'm trying to say. So it is a summation of E naught plus E double dot, E dash plus E double dash, and this is the cos component, and this is the sine component. This is the cos component, this is the sine component, and the ratio of these two is the tan delta, and E star is the maximum strain divided by maximum stress and E dash is equals to E star into cos delta, and E double dash is the E star into sin delta. So the typical DMA graph which we get is in the form of in this kind of curve. The blue line shows the storage modulus and the red line shows the loss modulus, and it crosses somewhere where these two graphs crosses each other is the transition point. So the first transition happens in the, if these are the polymer is very solid or very hard, then that region is the glassy region. Then we get a transition point. From there the transition region starts, and then we get a plateau which is the rubbery region, and then again there is a cross where the viscoelastic liquid region occurs. So this is plotted in the log range of storage and loss modulus, and the x-axis shows temperature or time or 1 by frequency or also frequency. So why do this vary? The elastic modulus and loss modulus vary with frequency and temperature. So the extent to which a polymer chain can store or dissipate energy depends on the rate at which the chain can enter its conformation and its entanglement relative to the frequency of the load. So first is the terminal zone. This zone is the period of oscillation is so long that chains can snag through their entanglement constraints and completely rearrange their conformation. So the terminal zone here you can see. Uh, so it is a period of oscillation. It's a very long period of oscillation. So the chains are getting entangled basically. Then we have a plateau region or plateau zone. So here the strain is accommodated by entropic changes to polymer segments between entanglement and providing very good elastic response. So that's why we get a plateau here. So the strain is almost constant in this range, and then we have a transition zone. So the period of oscillation is becoming too short, and to allow for complete rearrangement of chain conformations. Here the chain rearrange completely, so there is a enough mobility is there for the for substantial friction between the chain segments. Then we get a glassy zone where, so here this is a glassy zone where no configuration rearrangement occur within the period of oscillation. So stress response to a given strain is very high. So it will be glass-like solid, and the tan delta is in the order of 0.1. So why is it useful? So when we are looking at glass solution, more sensitive information we can get with the DMA as compared to the DSC. Then we can detect the secondary transitions also in these samples. Then we can measure the mechanical response, and many clamp types of various shapes and sizes are present for to perform this study. So for measuring TG, so E dash can be used for E dash onset. It occurs at low temperature. It relates to the mechanical field. Then E double dash peak. So this will give us the information about the, it will occur in the middle temperature, and it will give the physical property changes which are attributed to the glass transition in plastics, and it reflects the molecular processes uh, and which are there in the TG as the temperature on the onset of the segmental motion. Then tan delta peak, it can also give it. So these will occur at high temperature, and it will give the uh, information about the history uh, of our sample. So a good measure of the leather-like midpoint between glassy and rubbery states, and the height and shape will change systematically with amorphous content. So tan delta peak will change with the content of uh, amorphous regions in our material. So you can see all the three parameters or variables are shown here. So the blue one is the storage modulus, red one is the loss modulus, and this is the tan delta peak. So here tan delta peak shows some temperature which is around minus 2.13 picocelsius. Then we have the uh, uh, storage modulus which is around minus 20. So the TG is changing, but also we can get different TGs at different with different properties. So here the sample was the polysialic acid polymer, and the method was 3-degree rise in temperature. The frequency was kept 1 hertz and amplitude of 10 mm. So likewise, we can get the information of our sample. Then again, the Fox equation will also uh, can be used if we are blending two polymers. Then again, for the DMA calculation also, this Fox equation will be helpful to get the transition glass transition temperature of our polymer. So here, so for the 100% A, in this case, the glass transition is somewhere here, and for the 100% B, the glass function is somewhere here, and for 50-50 percent of A and B, the class function will shift at somewhere middle. So again, this shows that the two polymers are miscible very properly, and that's why their class function is shifted in somewhere in the middle point of both the two, and it is showing a single temperature of transition. That means these two are very miscible in nature. So again, the effect of cross-linking is also can be checked. So introducing cross-linking into polymer will proportionately increase the density. So as the density of the sample increases, the molecular motion in the sample is restricted and causing a very high rise in the glass junction temperature. So as we know that cross-linking will make it more crystalline and the molecular motion will be restricted. So therefore, the glass junction will increase. And then for low values of cross-linking density, the Tg can be found increasing linearly with the number of cross-link. So as we increase the cross-link density, the Tg value will also increase linearly. And for high cross-linking, the Tg will be broad and will not be very well defined in those cases. So here you can see at low density the Tg was less. Then as we increase the cross-linking density, the Tg will be increasing and it is becoming very broad at high cross-linking density. So the effect of temperature on the viscoelastic property. Again, so the viscoelastic behavior of polymer means that there is often a time dependence on their property in the addition of any temperature effects. So an example of this is shown for the polyethylene tetraphthalate measured at different mechanical oscillation frequency. So at different frequency, you can see the transition temperature is also changing at different frequencies. So it is again the properties depending upon the temperature, and it also is depending upon the frequency of oscillation. So coming to the case study, so the first one is for the carbon silica dual phase filler on chlorobutyl vulcanizates. So as you can see, for the unfilled, the peak is sharp, but for the filler, so for 40% filler, 20% filler, or 30% filler, all three cases, the peaks are becoming broad, and so with the increasing the amount of filler, it has the temperature is not changing, so it has no significant on the temperature. But however, the peak intensity is getting decreased. It is becoming broader. So that is one of the like sign that the filler is loaded in the material. So in the rubbery region, the curves of different vertex crossover around a wider temperature interval due to the relaxation of the interfacial region of the polymer filler in the composite. Then the storage modulus. So this one was for the tangent delta, tan delta. But so here again for the storage modulus, again the intensity is reducing, and there is somewhat change in the transition temperature. So from -62, it is coming around -30 or something. So here the again, so we can see that the fillers are attributed to the hydrodynamic effect of the filler particle embedded into the polymer container. So here again at higher filler loading, the agglomeration will occur, and at filling fraction larger than a certain threshold, the cluster will form an irregular network leading to a additional reinforcement. Then for the loss modulus again, there is no change as such. but so at around so the temperature is around minus 50 degrees, and it can be attributed to the conformational transition occurring in the polyisobutylene backbone caused by the micro-Brownian motion. So even the micro-Brownian motion can also be determined with the help of this analysis. And the amount of filler does not affect the transition temperature. And however, the intensity of some of the peaks are slightly increasing, not much, but slightly increasing with the increasing in the percentage of the filler loading. Then the strain dependent dynamic property. So we are increasing the strain, and with increasing the strain, the storage modulus is decreasing in all the cases. And that means the property is dependent upon the strain amplitude. So the variation in the storage modulus with dynamic strain at different filler loading shows so highest modulus is at low strain, and with increase in the strain, the modulus will decrease. So this is because of the gradual breakdown of the secondary structure. So we can also predict the property of the material at higher strain rate. So that can also be checked with the help of TG. Then the variation in the tan delta with dynamic strain amplitude at different filler loading. So again, for the increasing the strain, the tan delta is also increasing. So at 1% the variation is marginal. At 2% the increase in tan delta is more pronounced in the vulcanized of higher filler concentration. You see, here the values are very near, but in this, as we increase around about 2%, it is becoming higher as compared to the unfilled one. Unfilled one is this one. It is very much increasing, and also with the increasing the percentage, it is increasing. So it is attributed to the polymer filler interaction, desorption and reabsorption of hard rubber shell, and the breaking or deformation of the crosslink. The second case is the carbon black effect on chlorobutyl vulcanizers. So here, what we are doing is we are trying to check the property of the sample with increasing the size of the particle. So particle size, with increasing the particle size, what is happening basically? So it shows the pan effect that with increasing the size, the agglomeration will increase in the rubber. So if with decreasing the size, the agglomeration will increase, and that will cause an increase in the glass emission temperature. So this can be seen from here. So first, the peak's intensity was very low in the case of lesser, uh, smaller particles. However, in the case of bigger particles, the peak intensity was higher, and the glass emission was increasing in the case of with the decreasing surface area of filler. So that means in higher particle size, that means surface area is higher, sorry, lesser. So in that case, the TG will be less. As you can see here, for the ISF, so it is a smaller particle, the TG is high. With empty, that is the higher particle, the TG is reducing. But the peak magnitude is vice versa. So in the smaller particles, the magnitude is lesser. So as you can see here, the magnitude is lesser for the smaller particle. But for the larger particles, the magnitude of the peak is increasing. The same effect on the storage modulus is also seen. So the characteristic sigmoidal variation of the storage modulus with temperatures apparent from all the composition, as you can see. Then in the classic region, irrespective of the type of filler, the particle size and structure, increased filler loading enhances the storage modulus. So here the size does not vary the behavior of the material for the storage modulus property. But so we can see for the smaller particles, the with the increasing the filler loading, the storage modulus is increasing. And same for the loss modulus also. With so the loss modulus decreases with lower structure and lower particle size of blacks due to the influence of filler polymer interaction on the loss modulus. So here with the lower particle size, the loss modulus is decreasing. So the pine effect can be seen at minus 30 degrees Celsius. And Pine effect is the study of variation in dynamic mechanical properties under external strains. Pine effect has been studied at three temperatures. So in this study they have used three different temperatures: minus 30, then 32, and 70 degrees Celsius. And the effect of the uh, particle size was checked for different properties of the system, such as tan delta and storage modulus, and so on. And they have also used it to like with increasing the strain percentage, how the property is changing for different materials. So in most of the cases, with the increasing the filler, so in the unfilled there is no change, but with the addition of filler and with its higher particle size, the strain, the 10 delta was increasing and the storage modulus was decreasing. So with the increase in the strain amplitude, the storage modulus was decreases, and the loss tangent was increasing. And since near TG, the hydrodynamic effect is the main reinforcement mechanism. That's why this phenomenon is happening. And at low strain rate, that is 1%, the increase in loss tangent is marginal, irrespective of the filler. So as you can see, in the low percent, the increase is the large marginal, but however after this the increase is very high. So these are some of the standards which are used for to perform this kind of studies for the DMS studies. So for general principle, we follow this ISO standard 6721 1. Then for torsional or pendulum method, we use ISO 67212. And for tensile vibration non-resonance method 67214. For flexural vibration 67215. For shear vibration 67216. For torsional vibration non-resonance method 67217. Longitudinal and shear vibration 67218. And for tensile vibration 67219. So now let's come to some of the questions. So the significance of second heating scan in DSC are the determination of glass transition temperature, erasing the thermal history, true properties of the material, or all of the above. Can anyone answer this question? Hello? Anyone is listening? Hello? Can anyone tell me what should be the right answer for this question? Why do we do the second heating scan in the DSC? Okay, I'll go back to that slide if it is not clear. So this is a slide for where I mentioned the second heating scan, why it is used. So in the first heating scan, what happens that the thermal history of the polymer stays in the material, and that's why because of that we are not able to get the true property of the system. So for that, so in the first scan we get the information about the glass transition temperature and the crystalline transition and melting transition. However, when we perform the second heating scan, we will get the glass transition temperature only. Like what is the second heating scan basically? So first we are heating it from the zero to whatever temperature we want, around let's say 200 degrees Celsius, and again we are cooling it down and again heating it. So what happens? The thermal history of the polymer will get erased, and in that case we get a true TG value, that is the true property of the system. So what should be the answer? Can anyone tell me now what should be the answer for this question? So the significance of second heating scan is for determination of glass transition temperature, or erasing the thermal history or true properties of the material, or all of the above. Can anyone tell me now what will be the answer for this? Hello. No one is able to answer. Okay, let me explain then. So the answer is D, as I already told that the glass transition temperature we can accurately determine with the help of the second heating scan, and it reduces it erases basically the thermal history of the material, and the true property of the material can be therefore we can observe. So the option D, that is all of the above, is the correct answer. Then the second question is the how do you determine the percentage of crystallinity of a semi-crystalline material? So it is just the formula which we use. So can anyone remember what formula was used to determine the degree of crystallinity? I need to again go back to that slide. Degree of crystallinity. Yes, this one. So here you can see that the degree of crystallinity is delta H F minus delta Hc. Hf is the enthalpy of melting and Hc is the enthalpy of crystallization, divided by delta Hf 100%. So delta Hf 100% is the enthalpy of melting for a fully crystalline polymer, which you will need to look up. So here this one is the is what we need to check, and delta Hf minus delta Hc divided by delta Hf 100% into 100 is the formula for the to check the degree of crystallinity. So this is the correct answer. So answer B is the right answer. Delta HF minus delta HC divided by delta HF 100% into 100. I'll take mark it. B, and here it is B. Then which one of the following materials is used to calibrate the DSC? Silver, aluminium, indium, or copper? Anyone can answer this one? I hope this I mentioned it earlier also. To calibrate the DSC, what kind of material we need to use. So it basically depends upon the Curie temperature. So I'll go back to the DSC slide. Like this. Yeah. So here for the calibration of DSC, we can use indium, tin, or zinc. And why do we use indium? Because the transition temperature is very less for indium. We can also use tin and zinc also, but normally people use indium because the Curie temperature is very less for indium, that is around 156 degrees Celsius. So as you can see in this graph, it is around the peak is coming around 156.7 degrees Celsius. So this is basically uh, used for the it is most commonly used material, and it is also stable material. So as it is very stable in nature, that's why we use indium. It is mostly we use indium, and it is heated under nitrogen within the calorimetry to tend to reuse the indium contained DSC pans. So we normally heat it in nitrogen because we want to reuse it and we do not want any reaction to occur, but just to calibrate the instrument. So I hope now it is clear why do we use indium for the calibration of DSC. So one of the key points is that it is very stable in nature. So the answer is C. So next is which of the following statement is correct? In heat flux DSC, uh, heat flow is measured directly as the amount of power required, which is directly proportional to the heat flow. In heat flux DSC, the temperature difference is converted to heat flow using mechanical calculation. In heat flux DSC, the amount of power required to maintain the same temperature is measured. A major advantage of DSC flux DSC, heat flux DSC, is its ability to resolve overlapping transition that occur in many polymers. So, can anyone answer this question? Which one should be correct for the heat flux DSC? Okay, so again to make this clear, I will go back to the heat flux DSC part. Yes, so here this is the key difference between the heat flux and power compensated DSC. So in the heat flux DSC, the temperature difference is converted to the heat flow using mechanical calculations. In the power compensated DSC, the heat flow is measured directly as the amount of power required, which is directly proportional to the heat flow. So here we measure the power required in the power compensated one, and the heat flux we measure the temperature difference, which is converted to the heat flow using mechanical calculations. So as you can see, in using this formula, basically temperature difference is what we measure, and R is the resistance, which is normally known. So we can calculate the heat flow, that is the sample heat flow, heat flow from the sample. So as you can see, the sample and reference are kept in the same furnace, and then we check the temperature difference because the reference is normally an empty pan, and the sample temperature difference is what we uh, analyze, and using that temperature difference, it is converted to the heat flow, and likewise the heat flow measurement is done using the mechanical calculations. So in the heat flux DSC, the temperature difference is converted to the heat flow using mechanical calculation. So coming to this option, so option B is the correct answer for this case. That is heat flux DSC. Uh, the temperature difference is converted to the heat flow using mechanical calculation. So let's see what are the other options. So the option one was the heat flux DSC. In heat flux DSC, the heat flow is measured directly as the amount of power required, which is directly proportional to the heat flow. This is not the correct statement for heat flux DSC. And in the third one is the in heat flux DSC, the amount of power required to maintain the same temperature is measured. That is again wrong. And this one is for the power compensated one, and this one is for the other one. And the last one is the major advantage of heat flux DSC is its ability to resolve overlapping transition that occurs in many polymers. But this is for the case of modulated DSC, not for the heat flux DSC. So this is again the wrong answer. So this is not for the heat flux, but for the modulated one. So in the modulated one, we resolve. It has the ability to resolve the overlapping transition by providing the sinusoidal layer. So in all the other cases, the heat is providing the temperature is provided with in a linear way, but however in the modulated one the heat is provided in the sinusoidal wave form. So that's why the overlapping is resolved in that case. But however, for if we are talking about the heat flux DSC, the temperature difference is converted into heat flow using mechanical calculation is the correct answer. Then now we have to match the curves with the phase angle change. So the first one is having both the maxima at a particular point, at the same point basically. As you can see, the maxima is coming at the same point. Then for the second one, the maxima and minima are different, are coming at different points. And for the third one, the maxima is slightly different. So what should be the answer for this one? Anyone can tell me? In the second one, the maxima of one is the minima of the second one, and in the third one, it is in between. So the first one is showing zero phase angle. That is very simple because the response and so that there is no phase change or phase shift between the uh, basically the response and the what we apply. That is the stress and the strain. And then in the second one, the maximum of the first one is the minimum of the second. So it is a phase difference. There is a phase difference of 90 degrees. So the phase angle for this one is 90 degrees, and for the third one, it is in between 0 to 90 degrees. So that is the answer C, option C. That is phase angle in between 0 and 90 degrees. So if I match it, so first is the phase angle 0. That is 1B. Here 1B are coming into options. Then the second one is the phase angle 90 degrees. Why it is 90 degrees? Because from here to here it is 180 degrees. So if you like you can say that why it is 180 degrees, why it is not 180 degrees and 90 degrees, because the from angle from here to here, that is one maxima, uh, this one wave of the maxima. So this is actually this is the half wave, the total wave is till here. So this is the 90 degrees. From here to here it is 180 degrees, and since it is coming at midpoint of this one, so that's why it is 90 degrees here. So the phase angle shift is 90 degrees. So sorry, second D is the correct option. So D is coming in these two, but for one B we know. So one B and two D is what we are getting in the option C. So most likely the option C should be correct. But let's check the third option also. So in this case, the phase angle is between 0 to 90 degree. So the option C for this is the correct match for third one. So the third C is the correct one. So option C is the right answer for this case. Okay. So if anyone have any doubt, you can ask. So with this, we are like I conclude this session. But if anyone has any doubt, they can ask me right away. Anyone want to again go to the questions? Anyone want me to go through the questions again? Is there any doubt or anything? You can ask me. Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, yeah, now I can hear you. Yes. Yes. For TG, basically for polymers, it is around more than 350. It starts degrading. Yeah. From this table also you can see here. So most of the moisture will go at 100 degrees centigrade. Then the degradation of some of the polymers will start from around 350, less than 350. But most of them are stable up to that, and some of the elastomers they will degrade at in the range between 350 to 600. So that is the range for polymers. Here also. You can see. Anyone else have any questions to ask? Okay, if not, then we can conclude this session. Thank you all for joining. See you in the next session.